What if you found yourself stranded in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by nothing but vast fields and endless woods? How would you react if the silence was suddenly broken by something or someone? In these desolate places where civilization feels like a distant memory, unexpected encounters can turn an ordinary journey into a chilling experience. Imagine your car breaking down miles from the nearest town, or wandering off a trail only to realize you've wandered into something sinister. Tonight we're exploring true chilling middle-of-nowhere horror stories, tales that reveal the hidden dangers that lurk just beyond the horizon. But before we delve into tonight's terrifying tales, a huge shout out to all of you. Your support fuels this channel and keeps the nightmares coming. If our eerie stories captivate you, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a chilling episode. And if you want to help us grow and keep the fear alive, share our videos, drop a comment, or explore our support options on Patreon or Ko-fi. Every bit of support helps us bring you the best spine-tingling content. Thank you for joining us on this dark journey. Now let's embrace the shadows together. I live in a small town of about 11,000 people in rural Wisconsin, having relocated here for work while looking for a better job opportunity. One day, I was on my way to my employer's house, which he runs out of his basement until we can move into a proper office space. As I drove, I noticed a beat-up blue car tailgating me aggressively. The driver was a bald man in his 40s, and I could barely see his headlights from my Kia Soul's flat back end. It didn't take long for my frustration to boil over, and I flipped him off before deliberately slowing down to 5 miles under the speed limit. With no one else on the road, I figured I wasn't inconveniencing anyone. Despite several opportunities to pass me on the rural road, the man remained glued to my bumper. After a few minutes of this unsettling scenario, I pulled out my phone, pretending to take a picture of him and dialing 911. I was in the middle of nowhere, and the situation was becoming increasingly creepy. When I reached my turn, I decided to test him further. I turned left, and to my dismay, he followed. I approached a roundabout, hoping to lose him by circling it, but he mirrored my every move. It was clear he was toying with me, trying to instill fear. So, I made the decision to head to the police station instead. To my surprise, he followed me all the way there. I parked my car, ready to dash inside for safety, but he pulled up right beside me, blocking my door. He stared at me with a chilling smile, his sunglasses reflecting the sunlight. Despite his neat appearance and the pristine condition of his vehicle, a wave of dread washed over me. I have a background in behavior analysis, working with kids, but I also study criminal behavior, and I was keenly trying to assess his intentions. A few tense seconds passed before I grabbed my phone, this time determined to call 911. Just then, he rolled down his passenger window, said nothing, and then rolled it back up before driving away. I rushed inside to report the incident. Unfortunately, I had been too focused on driving to catch his license plate, but the officer informed me that there had been numerous complaints about tailgating incidents involving a blue car. I filed a report, and the officer handed me a card for victim services at a local women's shelter, advising me to take precautions in case he followed me home. Thankfully, I live in a secure building with my fiancée. However, when I returned to my car, I found a note on the windshield. It was simple, a smiley face, but it sent chills down my spine. After reporting everything to the police, the officer assured me he would call a few times that night and patrol my parking lot. In our small community, we look out for each other, which helped ease my anxiety. I felt confident that if I encountered the man again, I would immediately call 911 and lead him straight to the police station. I also made sure to communicate my schedule to my fiancé, letting him know that if I didn't text him within 10 minutes of when I was expected to arrive, he should call the authorities. It was a small town, but the fear of the unknown had left me on edge, and I was determined to protect myself. I was on a road trip in my Mustang, cruising from Texas to Arizona to visit my brothers. Normally, I keep emergency supplies like water and tools in the trunk. On this trip, I opted for a scenic back route, just me, the open road, and the wind in my hair. The desolate stretch of highway was perfect for driving fast, with nothing but endless desert and cacti surrounding me. As I sped down the road, I suddenly heard unsettling popping noises from under the hood, and the car started to jolt. I slammed on the brakes, bringing my Mustang from 90 miles per hour to a screeching halt. Getting out, I popped the hood, pretending to know what I was looking for, but there was no smoke or obvious damage. I got back in, hoping the car would start, but it wouldn't budge. With my Mustang being an old Ford, it had its share of quirks, but now I felt completely stranded. I tried to call my roadside service, but realized I had no cell reception out here in the middle of nowhere. I hadn't seen another car for over an hour, and the isolation was beginning to weigh on me. I sat on my trunk, waiting, my spirits lifting, when I finally saw headlights in the distance. I hopped off my trunk, waving my arms for help, but the car sped past without stopping. I felt a pang of despair. How could someone leave another person stranded like this? As night fell, hunger gnawed at me, and I resorted to drinking water from my supplies. Eventually, more headlights appeared, and I activated my hazard lights, waving again. A truck pulled over, and a large man climbed out. I explained my situation, but instead of showing concern for my car, he started asking unsettling questions: where I was going, why I hadn't called for help, and if anyone knew I was out here. The questions made my skin crawl. Despite my unease, he offered me a ride. Reluctantly, I climbed into his pickup, feeling increasingly uncomfortable as he drove. He mentioned it would be a while before we could get phone service. Then his truck suddenly slowed down. "Crap," he muttered, pulling off the road onto the sandy shoulder. He looked at me and said his truck had broken down. A sense of dread filled the air as he kept staring at me, his gaze unnerving. Finally, he asked me to go lift the hood while he cranked the latch. I was already suspicious. I stood a safe distance away, waiting to hear a click that would signify the hood was unlatched. Then, as I took a step toward the truck, I heard the engine roar to life. In that moment, he slammed on the gas, aiming the truck directly at me. Pure instinct kicked in, and I bolted into the darkness, narrowly escaping being hit. I glanced back to see his taillights still on the road, then suddenly heard gunshots, shots aimed at me. My heart raced as I thought I might die right there. I ran as fast as I could, dropping low to the ground when I could no longer hear his truck. After a while, I noticed his taillights fading into the distance. Exhausted and terrified, I eventually collapsed on the side of the road and fell asleep, my mind racing. Morning light brought another pickup truck rumbling by. I waved it down, covered in dirt and sand, and thankfully the driver and his wife were kind, offering me water and a ride to the nearest town. I was finally safe. It took a 45-minute drive back to my Mustang, followed by another trip to tow it to a shop. Long story short, it was the worst trip of my life. Being chased, nearly run over, and shot at isn't something you easily forget. In the summer of 2019, I took a job as a caretaker for an old, rustic cabin in a remote area of rural Wisconsin. It was a family friend's property, and they needed someone to keep an eye on it while they were away. Eager for a break from city life, I welcomed the solitude and the chance to spend my days in nature. The nearest neighbor was a mile down a winding dirt road, and the forest surrounding the cabin was dense and unwelcoming, with towering pines and thick underbrush. The first week was peaceful. I settled into a routine of cleaning, organizing, and exploring the trails that snaked through the woods. The cabin had its quirks, creaky floorboards and rattling windows, but I felt at home amidst the calmness. Evenings were spent on the porch, sipping tea and watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. But as night fell, an unsettling feeling began to creep in. The woods, once serene, felt alive with whispers and rustles that seemed to echo from the shadows. I attributed it to my overactive imagination, the result of too many horror movies. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. One night, while I sat on the porch, I noticed a figure standing at the edge of the tree line. It was just a dark silhouette, but something about it sent chills down my spine. My heart raced, and I squinted into the darkness, trying to discern any details. But no features were discernible, just an inky black shape against the backdrop of trees. I forced myself to look away, convincing myself it was merely a trick of the light. Each night after that, the figure returned, always in the same spot, always motionless. I found myself staring out into the woods, anticipating its arrival. I'd catch glimpses of it just before dusk, standing silently, an unsettling presence in the twilight. As time passed, it became a part of my routine. I began to dread nightfall, but the figure never approached, only watched. One evening, I resolved to confront it. Armed with a flashlight and a brave face, I stepped onto the porch. The figure stood in its usual spot, barely distinguishable in the encroaching darkness. "Hey, who's there?" I called out, my voice wavering slightly. The figure remained still. Gathering my courage, I took a few tentative steps toward it. As my flashlight beam pierced the dark, the figure seemed to dissolve, blending back into the shadows as if it had never existed. A cold wave of panic washed over me, and I sprinted back inside, locking the door behind me. I felt a primal urge to flee, but I knew I had to stay until morning. The next day, I packed my things and resolved to leave. As I stepped outside, I noticed something strange. A series of small footprints leading from the edge of the woods to the cabin door. They were too large for a child, yet too small for an adult. My heart sank as dread settled in. Who had been watching me all along? Just as I was about to head to my car, a sound made me freeze. A faint giggle carried through the trees. I looked around, heart pounding, but saw nothing. It was then that I remembered a story my friend had told me about the family who used to own the cabin. They had a daughter who had gone missing years before, and despite searches, she was never found. My stomach twisted at the thought. I could feel eyes on me, the forest holding its breath. I bolted to my car and sped down the dirt road, glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figure trailing behind. Months later, I received a call from my friend. He had decided to check on the cabin after hearing about my experience. When he arrived, he found the door wide open and the interior in disarray, furniture overturned, belongings scattered. The police were called, but there were no signs of forced entry. What they did find was a small, tattered teddy bear at the foot of the porch. It looked strikingly familiar, like a toy that belonged to the missing girl. That night, unable to sleep, I kept replaying the events in my mind. I remembered the feeling of being watched, the dark figure, and the footprints. I couldn't shake the sense that the woods were hiding something dark and sinister. I never returned to that cabin. The once idyllic retreat became a haunting memory, a reminder that some places are better left undisturbed. I often think of the whispers in the woods and the shadowy figure that lurked just beyond the trees. It was a presence that reminded me of the unknown, of secrets that lie hidden beneath the surface of the familiar. Sometimes I wonder what else is watching from the shadows, waiting for the next unsuspecting visitor to wander too close. In the summer of 2020, an eerie stillness settled over my town, transforming it into a desolate landscape where time seemed to stretch infinitely. The pandemic had cast a shadow over daily life, with streets devoid of activity and parks feeling more like ghost towns. While my town wasn't heavily impacted by COVID, the atmosphere was thick with an unsettling sense of isolation. Jobs vanished overnight, and everyone was instructed to stay inside, leading to a profound case of cabin fever that had me clawing at my walls. With little else to do, I took to walking. I wandered through the quiet suburbs, empty parks, and the surrounding woods, seeking solace among the trees. The few stores that remained open became regular stops, and I soon found myself longing for the freedom of the outdoors. My walks evolved into hikes, each new trail becoming a refuge from the stifling confines of my home. As the weeks rolled on, my routes became a mental map, and the rhythm of my footsteps on the forest floor was comforting. I began craving a challenge, a hike that would take me deeper into the wilderness. One morning, I set out to conquer a 10-mile loop that promised to lead me far from civilization. Arriving at the trailhead, I was greeted by an empty parking lot, amplifying my nervous excitement. I meticulously packed my gear, water, snacks, a first aid kit, and a map, aware of the need for caution in my solitary adventure. Still, anxiety crept in. What if I got hurt out there? But I pressed on, relishing the familiar pace of my feet on the path. 3 miles in, the solitude morphed into a friend rather than an enemy. I lost myself in the serenity of the woods, allowing my mind to wander. As I veered off the beaten track drawn by a distant stone peak, I felt a surge of confidence. The terrain was rugged but intriguing, beckoning me forward. It was in this desolate section of the forest that I stumbled upon something unsettling. A pair of worn shoes discarded near a ravine, their laces tangled carelessly. Next to them lay folded shirts, fluttering eerily in the breeze. Curiosity piqued. I brushed it off as remnants of careless day trippers and continued toward the mountain peak. As I pressed on, I began to notice strange lines in the dirt, patterns that suggested something heavy had been dragged through the earth. Unease settled in as I followed these markings deeper into the woods. The allure of adventure began to fade, replaced by a creeping discomfort. After what felt like an eternity, I spotted movement ahead. My heart raced as I edged closer, peering over an embankment. There, in a clearing, stood a group of men, their clothes ragged and faces obscured by grime. They were gathered in a makeshift circle, lifting concrete blocks above their heads in a bizarre, ritualistic manner. My pulse quickened as I watched, anxiety tightening my chest. The men chanted in unison, their voices resonating ominously through the trees. A slender figure moved among them, striking their backs with a thin instrument, drawing glistening blood under the harsh sunlight. Horror gripped me as the unsettling truth began to dawn. The discarded clothing I had seen earlier belonged to these men. Panic surged within me, and I turned to flee. My heart raced as I stumbled through the underbrush, the forest feeling like it was closing in around me. I could still hear their cries echoing in the distance, a haunting reminder of the grotesque scene I had just witnessed. Just as I broke free from the thicket, I was confronted by another group of men arriving at the ravine. They removed their shoes and shirts, tying ropes around their waists, each leading to a cinder block marked with ominous words. They greeted me with solemn nods, their faces set with grim determination, before slowly making their way toward the mountain peak. I watched in a mix of horror and disbelief as they dragged the blocks behind them, the sight forever burned into my memory. The forest fell silent again, an unnatural quiet enveloping the scene as if nothing had happened. I never returned to that trail. What had once been a refuge now felt like a site of haunting memories and unsettling mysteries. The men and their bizarre ritual remained a chilling enigma I had no desire to unravel. From that day on, I stuck to the marked paths, my sense of adventure replaced by a deep respect for the unknown and an instinctual fear of what might be hidden in the wild. Even now I can hear the echoes of their chants and the silence that followed, a reminder that some corners of the world are best left unexplored. It wasn't just isolation that terrified me, but the terrifying unknown lurking just beyond the safety of the path. If you've encountered a terrifying event or have a spine-chilling horror story to share, we at Eerie Shadows want to hear from you. Share your experiences with us and let's uncover the mysteries lurking in the eerie shadows together. Be sure to like and subscribe to our channel for more eerie tales and spine-chilling stories like this one.